A lot of people think, I don't know anybody who's had a crime committed against them. But if you were to think about reading the newspaper, you've perhaps remember reading about Boy Scouts and gymnastics teams and Catholic Church and a lot of different systems where children were sexually abused. And those systems reveal that these crimes happen to any kind of kid in kid-friendly places, faith communities, sports leagues, those things that parents really vet and bring their child to. But the thing is that sometimes in some of those systems, perpetrators are also vetting, how can I get access to a kid in a place that's trustworthy?
My name is Matt Brose with Lockton, and I have been so fortunate in my life to be surrounded by some really awesome people. So I want to be able to get their stories out there so that we can all learn from them together. Welcome to the Excellence Culture. Well, welcome to the Excellence Culture. I am super excited about this conversation I'm going to have today. Two people that I've grown so much respect for. Really connected to something that we all have a huge passion for, and we're going to get into that. It's the Children's Advocacy Center of North Texas. But I've got Kristen Howell here, who is the CEO of the Children's Advocacy Center. And also joining us is Melanie Vest, president of DATCU. And so we're just going to have a great flowing conversation about things that we care about a lot. But I just want to kind of start out by saying it has just been a joy to get to know y'all, and I hope that our listeners get to know y'all. But to start out, if you could just kind of, give a formal introduction of yourself, which I kind of already did, but give a formal introduction of yourself. And then we're going to kind of get into stories a little bit. But why don't you?
Sounds good. Well, good. I'm Kristen Howell. I've been the CEO of the Children's Advocacy Center for North Texas for the last 6 years, but I've been in victim services for 25 years, so my entire career. Social worker I went to Baylor University and then went to graduate school, actually just followed the guy, but landed at a really good graduate school at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, because I had my eyes on this cute Duke lawyer, or Duke Law School guy, and so we got married after that. And moved to Dallas and have been here our entire careers. Went up to the Denton CAC, and my very first official board meeting, Melanie Vest was being sworn in as one of the new board members.
Okay.
So she and I met that way.
Okay, awesome. That's a great introduction. Thank you so much. And Melanie?
And I am Melanie Vest. I'm the president of DATCU, and I've been with DATCU for 23 years, my whole career. I am originally from California, and like Kristen, I married a Texas high school football coach, and Texas high school football is king, and you don't move those boys to California.
Especially California.
Especially California, and so this is where we have raised our family, and I'm so thankful that we have spent our roots here for the last 23 years.
I love that. I love it. I always start these conversations because I really like to kind of hear how people were brought up a little bit. And so I would love to just kind of touch on that. I know we've got some meaty things we're going to talk about and some pretty serious things that we're going to talk about. But I'd first love to hear, you, Kristen, tell me a little bit about your upbringing, where you were brought up, maybe some of the values.
Sure. I grew up ultimately we moved to a small town called Livingston, Texas, which is around a big lake. And so small town. At that point, my parents were divorced and my mom had remarried a guy that my sister and I were in school together, and the principal introduced our parents. And so then they got married, and then they had twin daughters. So I went from being a daughter of a single mom to having this built-in family and all these sisters. And so we're very close. My stepdad was president of the local bank, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom at that point, and she did a lot of service. And so it was a pretty simple life. I was always fascinated by helping people, and had certainly a family that was very involved in the community. My mom served on several boards, my dad served on several boards, and so that was a very routine part of our life. And so when I went to Baylor, I got a job at the Gap and then also volunteered at the local rape crisis center. And that was not something that my peers did, but as soon as I started answering those hotlines, I was just whisk away into this world of responding to victims. I was very, very compelled by their stories. And at first you sort of hear victim stories and you think, gosh, they must have done something wrong or something. You can't put your head around it. I didn't grow up like that. But over the time, story after story was sounding the same, and I realized that victims there was like a playbook by ways that people hurt other people. And so responding to that, walking alongside them was so powerful to me. My very first job, though, was in graduate school, sort of as a social worker, and I worked in an AIDS clinic, and that was in the late 90s. And so everyone died. And that clinic taught me the enormous power of walking beside people, that trying to fix it, trying to pretend it didn't happen, those weren't options. But sitting beside people, being on a journey with them had enormous power. It taught me a little bit the bounds of what I could do and also the power of what I could do. And so I think that early lesson in sort of recognizing my limits, but recognizing the power of our universe and that there's a bigger power that has to be in the room with you, that has instilled a lot in my response in this career.
Yeah, kind of defines advocacy. I mean,
absolutely,
being an advocate.
Yes, and a lot of people come into it thinking they can be a hero in it. And the truth is, there is enormous heroism in walking beside someone, and that I came to an earlier understanding of than a lot of my young staff feel a sense of burnout because they feel powerless, and I have to share with them the power of sitting beside.
That's so good. So good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How about you, Melanie?
So I was born and raised right outside of San Francisco, so Northern California, so the beautiful wine country. Sonoma County is where I grew up, and so had no idea the beauty and majesty of where I grew up until you move away, and then you realize just the
Especially
beauty of
Texas.
it. Yes. But like Kristen, a little bit in that I grew up, my parents were married for 50 years, and so grew up in a very steady home, lived in the same house from the time I was born until the time I left for college, never moved, very steady, very tried and true. My parents were both very involved in church. I always tell people if the doors of the church were open, we were there. My dad was the music minister. My mom played the piano. We were there no matter on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And so as a young kid, that's what you know, and then you grow into teenage years and you're like, what are we doing? Again, I'm so thankful that those roots run so deep for me. And my dad was an accountant and my mom worked for a savings and loan. So I grew up in the financial industry. I'm of the generation of where you took your daughter to work, those days of take your daughter to work day. I always loved that. I always loved the idea of corporate America. My dad was a very goal-driven man, and I remember being in the 6th grade and he sits me down and he's like, write down what are your goals for life. And I'm like, I think about my 6th graders and I'm like, they don't know, but I knew. I wrote down that day that I wanted to be a successful businesswoman, and God just placed that in my heart, and I have been driven to that ever since. And so grew up in Northern California, and then I decided, true story, my girlfriends and I learned how to country line dance at a local country bar. We thought it would be fun to live in Texas for a year. We were juniors in college. We had no money.
What school was this?
We were at Sonoma State.
Okay.
Sonoma State University, and we had no money, and there was a student exchange program where foreign student exchange, but it's national student exchange program, and so we were able to go to North Texas but pay our California state tuition. And this was pre-internet, so we literally picked North Texas out of a book, and it was like, oh, it's right in between Dallas and Fort Worth. There's got to be some great country line dancing bars in between those two towns. I mean, we knew nothing. And that's just where you can completely see God's hand in how he got me here. And came to North Texas with my girlfriend. We were supposed to stay 2 semesters, and I met my husband within the first month I was here. Denton Bible at that time had a really phenomenal college ministry, and we were both really involved in that. And so we met through that. And again, like I said in the introduction, I married a Texas high school football coach, and we got married and we've been here ever since. And so from my career standpoint, I was going to North Texas and knew that I wanted to be in the financial industry, and went to the career board at North Texas and saw that DATCU was hiring a teller, a part-time teller, and so applied. And so that's where I started. I started as a part-time teller in the drive-thru. I'd been working though, since I was 14, I worked for the local ballpark, I worked in restaurants, so I'd always worked. So working was definitely just what was going to need to happen to survive. And so, but then I found the credit union, and so started as a part-time teller in 2001, and have just had the opportunities and blessings to move that through my career. And it's been a phenomenal place to work. The impact that we get to make in the community kind of goes back to my roots as far as from just the church. My parents weren't necessarily involved in boards or anything like that, but they were the hands and feet of the church. And I remember many times my parents would give people money and cars, and we didn't have excess resources to be handing that stuff out, but my parents always had their door open. So that definitely resonated with me. And so then partnering and working for an organization like DATCU just has allowed me to flourish in that of giving back to the community is so much of what
generosity.
Our culture is.
That's what I know of DATCU.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so again, that's how Kristen and I met, was
Yeah.
my opportunity to get to serve on her board. And so it's been a fun ride for sure.
Yeah, that's how we all met too.
Right, yeah.
I loved you talking about kids going to work. We do at Lockton, we have a day called Camp Lockton, and more kids at our office than there is adults that day. Efficiency goes way down,
Yeah.
but
it's
morale
so
goes
making an
crazy
impact.
up.
You don't know what little Kristens and Melanies are running around there.
I've never been a part of something that seemed to bring up morale more than that day did.
Yeah.
It was just, but really, they had activities going all over our office for kids. It was really, really cool.
I have so many fond memories. My dad would he was a banker, so closed on Saturdays, but we would go on Saturdays and he would do his work. And so we would get to go and, again, pre-internet, so we got to fill out duplicate forms. And we worked hours upon hours. I was definitely going to always work. I knew working was special and I wanted to do that. And I could picture the outfit one would wear to work. I wanted a pencil skirt and heels. It was like I wanted this whole thing. I don't wear that outfit very much anymore.
I think it was Donna on the suits
Yes.
Yes. Donna.
She was phenomenal.
Yeah. Kristen, I want to kind of get into your story, what led you to the center, and then we're going to talk about the center. So maybe you can kind of get into your career a little bit to the point that we're at the center.
So I worked with answering hotlines at Rape Crisis Center, worked in domestic violence for about a decade, and loved that, saw the impact of the community in the response for a nonprofit, and the ways that the community could step up for people. I started off as a therapist in that domestic violence shelter, and then someone took a chance on me to learn the fundraising side. So I have enormous respect for those leaders who tap you and pull you out of your comfort zone and see something else in you. I always said that I'm not a fundraiser or salesperson by training, but I was able to tell the story of the woman I sat across from. And so I found this really important role of, I knew what women experienced who were in a violent relationship and what they perceived that people thought about them. And then I knew what the community wanted to do and how they wanted to help. And I was like, I can be a matchmaker in this. I can help people get the resources they need to recover. What I found, though, in that world at that time was that the systems weren't very strong. Police weren't talking to service providers. There was a real disconnect, and people were frustrated along the way in different systems. And I ultimately moved over to the Advocacy Center, which is the child abuse response is a very robust system response. When a crime has been committed against a child, the law in Texas is that these different investigating agencies have to talk. And so my very first meeting in an advocacy center, I was blown away not only by the victim services, which I loved but had seen successful in many different nonprofits. What I had never seen run so successfully was the partnership with the systems. And so when you have that, when you have a seat at the table as the community saying, we have to do this right, we have to privilege the voice of a victim, we have to understand the role of trauma in memory and response, that being at the table with those people and making sure it was seamless for victims was, again, that connector role, only now it was with the people who could make a difference at the system level. And I loved it. Like I remember being that first, what we call a multidisciplinary team meeting, where all the different disciplines are there, every law enforcement officer, every child protective services worker, the district attorney's office, sitting together saying, this happened 2 weeks ago, what do we need to go forward with this case? And victims, when they hear the system hears you, they believe you, and they will pursue accountability for this, it is a game changer in their path on healing. It doesn't cause healing alone, but being believed is a huge, huge leg up in the healing journey. And so I was just, I was blown away, and I was like, I want to do this the rest of my life.
Yeah, I love it. I love it so much. So you just basically explained well what the center does. I think it's important to note that we're not talking about CASA.
Yeah, thank you.
We're talking about the Children's Advocacy Center.
And people get those mixed up all the time, yes.
And so we're not talking about CASA. CASA is great in what they do too, but
they're an important partner in the spectrum of child abuse response, but a CASA is assigned by a court on the civil side only when a child is going into foster care. You get into foster care when you have two parents who cannot show up for you. That is a relatively small portion of the child abuse continuum. Another portion of that is people who've had crimes committed against them, children who've had crimes committed against them. And a lot of people think, I don't know anybody who's had a crime committed against them. But if you were to think about reading the newspaper, you've perhaps remember reading about Boy Scouts and gymnastics teams and Catholic Church and a lot of different systems where children were sexually abused. And those systems reveal that these crimes happen to any kind of kid in kid-friendly places, faith communities, sports leagues, those things that parents really vet and bring their child to. But the thing is that sometimes in some of those systems, perpetrators are also vetting, how can I get access to a kid in a place that's trustworthy? And so they're literally wolves in sheep's clothing. And so we know that. So any of us could have a child who's a victim of a crime. And so you want your response in your county. You don't ever want to have to make the call or get the call that that a crime's been committed against your child. But if you did, me, we would insist that this response be handled right. And so it is our promise at the Children's Advocacy Center, and the network is in every county in the state of Texas and actually is a national network as well. But the state of Texas network is very strong. And there's a lot of reassurance that I want to give your listeners wherever they're listening, that if this happened to their kid, and it could, then there's a great response in your local Children's Advocacy Center. And I happen to run one of those 70 centers in Texas.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. For me, the way that I was introduced to the Advocacy Center, I used to host a big party, and I would choose, it was Friendsgiving, and you know about this really well. It was Friendsgiving. We would choose a friend of the year, and that friend of the year would then choose a charity of the year that he wanted that party to benefit. And that friend of the year that I chose was a police officer in Flower Mound, and that police officer said 100%, I want it to be the Children's Advocacy Center. And for me, I hold in very high regard our police officers, right? And so that recommendation to me opened my eyes in a pretty significant way. And then to be able to have the opportunity to be on the board, which happened later, has just been such a blessing. Melanie, I would love to hear kind of what led you to your involvement in the center.
Absolutely. The DATCU has been involved with the Children's Advocacy Center really since its inception. And so from my long term at the credit union, I've always known about it. And so I've served on many different nonprofit boards and had been kind of rolling off of some. And obviously being a mom of 3 kids and being very vested in this community, obviously knowing what the Children's Advocacy Center does, wanted to see how can I help, what can I do? And so the opportunity to come on the board happened, and it's been a huge blessing. You realize, this crime happens, but then when you get to hear the response and the success stories of these kids as they have the healing and justice and hope that we are able to provide for them, you're all in, just like you, right? Like, you get introduced to it, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, okay, I'm in. What do I do? How do I help?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
I've also heard you, though, talk about the power of relationship. And we had a really fun relationship right away. I mean, I was new to the community. And so, I looked to you in many ways. You were right away on my executive committee because of your financial acumen. So she was the treasurer, which was pretty unusual for a first-year board member. But so right away, she was on my very inner circle. And we had fun. Like, we could see each other across the room, and we were both thinking the same thing often.
Having nonverbal conversations with our eyes.
Exactly. She knew earlier than I did that some changes were going to need to be made, or there was an opportunity to make some changes and to grow some. We had a fantastic foundation, but maybe had the ability to kind of hit the gas a little more. And so Melanie is bold. And so she gave me permission and then had my back as a newbie in the community. Because I run a little bold, but I'm also a people pleaser, right? I mean, I don't want to mess this up. I wanted this job. I wanted this role. I wanted to lead this organization. I wanted to be successful. I did not want to mess it up. And half the people are saying, if you make changes, you're going to mess it up. And oh gosh, I don't want to do that. And she said, I think you can make the changes and I've got your back. And those are really powerful words early on. As another woman, I felt like I could relate to her. I just had a lot of instant trust in her. And so that was a fun thing. So, yeah.
It's so interesting. I see, and you guys see this too. You see the Lord's hand just in the fact that I think about the old model, because I did know the old model prior to you being there. Would it have been able to steward the growth? The hard part is that growth of the Advocacy Center isn't really something to celebrate.
Right,
totally,
right,
because
absolutely.
We wish that there wasn't a need, right? But unfortunately, there's a huge need.
Right.
And for those resources to be everywhere is a huge need. And you've been able to continue to grow those resources to where in the area that we represent, people have the resource.
Yeah. And something about that, I'll tell you from a business standpoint, and this is where, that leadership hat, that young 7-year-old who dreamed of a pencil skirt and making a difference in the world, I had this really amazing business opportunity to grow the infrastructure of an organization that has a good reputation. And so we're in this North Texas area growing 80 people a day. In Dallas, we talk about things growing up, more skyscrapers, more businesses coming in. But in the North Texas area, in Denton County, Collin County, Wise County, the talk is about more families. And for my business, where families are, there are more family crimes. And so suddenly you needed to be able to have a bigger response. The geographic space was huge, but the number of crimes literally doubled since I've been there, not because of awareness, but because of growth. And so then having the community not have that complacent sense of like, well, it's always been this little organization. We have always given at this level. No, we have a new level that we need to do. So we needed people to be able to jump in at higher levels, and we needed more people at our base. And so that from a business perspective was extremely invigorating and challenging. I love victim services. That was, I hate to say, the easier part of my work. I know that work really well. But learning the business side and getting the challenge to step up and build in a community was thrilling, has been thrilling.
That's awesome.
And we all have built businesses, right? And so you have that, but there's this gap in between of growth is coming, growth is here. We know, when we first started, both of us on the board and with the Advocacy Center, at least with North Texas, it was like we didn't necessarily have the data to show we were going to service 3,000 kids in a year.
Right.
Yeah. We were servicing 1,500, 1,000. I think it was 1,000 the very first year. But you could see the landscape changing, and that's culture, right? That's being able to get people to buy in to a vision versus data. Data is so important. Obviously, I'm a financial person. I'm a firm believer in the data. You have to have the data. But sometimes to be a good leader, you have to sell a vision and communicate, not even sell it, but just be able to articulate and communicate, be at the table with the right people, have the Matts of the world saying like, hey, I didn't even know that this was a thing, and now I want to be involved. It's how do you tell that story over and over again? And that's a testament to Kristen and to our board. I mean, our board really bought into, we have to make some changes, just like all of our cultures, right? Like our business cultures. Sometimes you have to make changes to prepare for what's next. And sometimes that's painful, and sometimes there's this is how we've always done it, and how we did it serviced 1,000 kids. We need to be able to service 3,000 kids. So what is that gap in between? And that's where leadership and relationships and vision and inviting people to the table really pieces all of that together to bridge that gap. It's a huge benefit. And
scaling is hard,
absolutely.
And people are resistant to that scale. They remember being back to back 20. Since we've been there, we had 20 people on staff. Now we have 85. That feels different. When you walk in the door, it feels different. And there's some folks from that 20-person days, and I wish it was back to that. Well, I do too. I wish that 2,000 more kids a year weren't being assaulted by someone that they loved, but they are. And so if that's the facts, then we will respond to every one of them. And we will not put our own desire to be in smaller, slower moving space ahead of the fact that a child is in need. With that need, and that's where Melanie, that grounded in faith and grounded in community and data, it really if there was a child in need, you better, I knew from the get-go, she was going to give me the green light to serve it. And she knew that I would step up in that commitment as well. I mean, that's a cool commitment. And at the leadership level, we have to remain committed at the value level. Every child, every service, every effort. All right, let's do it.
Yeah.
Well, and you talked about we went from 20 to 80. We went from one location, 10,000 square foot, maybe, to 3 locations to
50, 60,000 square feet.
Absolutely. So again, back to, your audience of culture in business, it's like, not only do you have more employees, which, I mean, that just, it complicates and is a benefit, but then you have more buildings and more, because that's the mission of the Advocacy Center is, if I live in Wise County, I want to be able, the drive from Bridgeport to Denton, that may hinder somebody from getting the services that they need. So again, we want to step in the gap and be able to say, okay, we can't have a CAC in every town, no, but we can bridge the gap where it needs to be. So we were able to open the Bridgeport location, and now we have a location in Denton. Now we have a much larger location in Louisville. We doubled our capacity in Louisville. And so again, with that growth, it's not just serving the victims and the families. I mean, that's the other piece of it. It's a whole family unit. When a crime like this happens to a child, it doesn't just affect that child. I mean, we're all parents in here, right? I mean, that would affect the entire family unit. It can affect an entire community. And so how do we service and step in the gap of all of that?
Yeah. As you're in that growth mode, because I want to get into some specifics about what the center does, but I want to talk about this growth mode that both of you were highly involved with. From a nonprofit standpoint, does the building of the resources and the infrastructure, what precedes what? The giving side? Because you guys are probably at a place where you saw we need to grow, but do we have the revenue, the giving, to be able to sustain it?
Yeah.
And so how do you kind of balance the giving versus the need for growth? Does giving precede it?
Yeah. To me, this is where surrounding myself with bold leaders is crucial. So nonprofit fundraising, nonprofit planning is a different model. We don't look at what we can make in the community and then therefore how many pieces, how many widgets will we serve. That is not I can't do that. I have to say, what is the crime rate? What is the population? What is the need? From there, what will it take to create that? And so we've had years where we had an increase in our budget in a single year of $1 million because that's what the need suggested we were going to have to do. And we set goals as a board. I don't know how we're going to get the extra $1 million. I'm terrified. I go to sleep. My eye is twitching. I wake up. My eye continues to twitch for the rest of the day. I mean, really, truly faith but a desire, a deep, true commitment to serve every child and to not stop telling the story until every child is served. And so we would set these goals. My CFO is amazing nonprofit leader also, because he understands you start with the expenses first. What is it going to take to run this place? And he meets with all of my program staff. What needs do you have that you need? And then we take that to the board and we say, all right, this is what's ahead. Can we do it? And they say, we have to do it. And we do. Yeah. We've done it every year. It's amazing. We've set goals that were beyond expectations. We have found money in pockets that we wouldn't have dreamed. Money has come to us. People have come to us and made impact gifts that changed the face of our community. And I'm stunned by that. And yet I have this, I'll bring on a new finance committee every year. And every year they start off terrified. This won't happen. What are we going to have to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I think it will happen. We're going to have to make it happen. What's your plan? My plan is pray, hustle. I don't know, a combo of those. And it works.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things too that it's the community that we serve, right? And so we are by law required to provide a certain level of service to these children. That's just, the law mandates it. Mm-hmm. Great. Well, there's also things of, okay, well, we can service 3,000 kids, but what does that level of service look like? And that's really where the board steps in and says, okay, so if we have 300 kids on a waiting list for services,
for mental health services, imagine you had a child that has reported to you they've been holding a secret. My grandfather, my uncle, my preacher, my teacher has been sexually abusing me. Mm-hmm. They've been holding that. All of a sudden, you as a family are catapulted into crisis. You are realizing the signs you were seeing in your child. They were acting out. They were having difficulty sleeping. They were dreading going to places. Their behavior changed right before your very eyes, but you couldn't put your finger on it. That feeling, as a parent, you finally, all the stars align and there's this awareness that happens and you instantly get into fierce parent mode. I will do whatever it takes to put this person behind bars, and I will do whatever it takes to get my child okay. And so that is the response of the Advocacy Center, is how can we coordinate the justice component so that investigation is strong, and if there's a prosecution that's warranted, that it is effective, and that if there is healing services needed, there is not a wait. There is expert service response. That's got to happen. And so if I have a wait list, if I experience a sense of like, our staff needed to grow more than it did, I have to bring that to the board and say, And we did. We brought it to the board and we brought it to the community, and they said, you must do better. And we were able to raise more money than ever before because we said there is a need in this community, and a child who is a whole group of children that an emergency has happened, and we had to say, in 6 weeks we'll help you. Not on my watch. No. And look, it's not gonna happen.
And I want to keep really bringing awareness to the center right now because I want people to know what the center does. So I'd love to kind of go through maybe a case that you can think of at the very beginning of when the center gets involved.
Yeah.
Do you have one kind of in mind at all?
Sure. And
we don't have to use names or anything.
Right.
But,
I can. A case that's easier for me is one that actually came through the center before I was even there, and I'm going to tell it because you can see the adult who was once a young child who came through the center, and that is even more. I can tell you a story of every day of someone coming in and kind of that emergency feel a child reveals to a friend or a teacher. Those are the two most typical responses that a child tells this.
And we would consider this an outcry.
An outcry of abuse, that's exactly right. Yeah. But in this case, it was the outcry of abuse came, a child was in counseling because her behavior had changed. She was at a local private school in a faith-based community and a very, very close family. And this child reported to her counselor because her behavior had changed. She was going into counseling that her basketball coach was hurting her. And it was it was devastating to the family. That coach had befriended the family, had what we now know groomed the family so that everybody had their trust high and their barriers low, and that the special time that this coach invested in this child, which looked like the type of mentorship we would all hope for our child, was actually being a betrayal. And so that child reported that outcry of abuse, that he was sexually abusing her. Instantly, the family believed, and they made a report to local law enforcement. Law enforcement brought her to the center. And that's the way it happens every time. That's the law, Melanie's point.
So a law enforcement person has to trigger the center.
That's
basically.
exactly right.
Okay.
It must be an open investigation, but they must go to a children's advocacy center. And that's because communities have said kids deserve a child-friendly place to tell their story. And one of the ways that you can understand that is through understanding the opposite of what used to happen. If a child told a law enforcement officer before the center existed, they might have been in the back of a squad car when they were telling their story, or they might have gone to the sheriff's office, which, if you've ever gone to the sheriff's office, is a pretty threatening place. It's a place built for folks in trouble. It's not a place built for kids. It's really intimidating. And honestly, what happens in sexual assault cases is kids are tricked into this assault, and maybe they have had some boundaries blurred, and maybe they have even been coerced into doing something that maybe their parent has told them not to do. And so they are worried they're going to be in trouble. And so that trouble space of going to the police department really reinforces, you've done a bad thing and you're going to get in trouble. And so we knew back in the day before advocacy centers that children wouldn't tell the truth. They told a part, and not saying that they lied, but they didn't tell all the facts because they were afraid of getting in trouble. The cases would fall apart and there was no prosecution.
And just the people who were investigating it. That's not, I mean, you have somebody who's investigating drug crimes and also asking a 10-year-old about the sexual abuse from their basketball coach. So, I mean, those are just two different specialties.
Yes.
And so that's, again,
that's
another
great.
statement and piece that the advocacy provides is this is what they're I mean, our forensic interviewers are trained to do this. This is what their specialty is. They're not drug investigators.
Right. They're child development
point,
experts. Yeah. I mean, imagine getting that information of a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old. Those are really tricky ages. They require, I'm scared of those ages, right? Like, those are hard stages to get all the facts out of. So the Advocacy Center movement was born, but this young girl went through that center, went through our center. And she got that forensic interview where she revealed in that exactly what was being done, the months of assaults that were happening that she had kept secret.
And I would say, not to interrupt, but when you go into the center, like you said, like you go to a police station and it is very unwelcoming to a victim, right?
Yeah.
It's for bad guys, right? And so, but now it totally makes sense why you walk into the center and it is such a friendly looking place.
Yes. Yeah.
With friendly people.
Yes.
Like it,
Truly, there's a
friendly.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds, a lot of people think nonprofit equals that we're poor and that maybe we're, that things like customer service aren't necessarily valued. But for us, customer service is valued.
Yeah.
Almost like you would get at a hotel. A friendly face, let me open the door for you, let me get you a thing of water, have a snack. There's this different feel, and kids realize right away, I'm not in trouble. Nobody here is afraid of me. This isn't a bad thing. Now, it's private because we know that kids are very impressionable about seeing a lot of other people around, and so we do really work to maintain privacy and having not a high volume flow. We're really trying to stagger it so that kids may see no one else in the building besides their team that's helping them, or maybe one other team that's helping, but it's not like a crazed ER.
Yeah.
We don't want it to look like that because we know that can be intimidating to kids. So every little detail is considered from a trauma standpoint and from a child development standpoint. So thank you for bringing that up. Ultimately, this little girl reported abuse. That abuse was investigated by law enforcement. It was actually prosecuted, and the guy got many, many years in prison. But that's not enough. Like, that doesn't make the nightmares go away. It doesn't make the intrusive thoughts go away. It doesn't make a child's sense of self immediately recover. They have to have trauma and evidence-based trauma therapy. They have to. And her parents needed it too. So she got that. She would say today it changed her life. Ultimately, she experienced what I would call, this is why I like telling a story of an adult, is because you can see our job is to respond in the moment. It's to provide the healing services. And then you hope, right? I hope that this terrible thing that happened doesn't define this child. And now I can see this woman is now a grown-up adult woman. She's involved in her community. And in fact, she's done even what is really exciting in our work. We call it post-traumatic transformation. So she is able to transform the community and transform her experience into a pay-it-forward moment where she can, she's seeking to create legislation and raise awareness in communities all over the country. So a bad thing happened. She would have never wished it would have happened. But I bet she gets to the end of her life and says, if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have made quite the impact I made in the world. That's remarkable. That's what the center is about. She got justice, she got healing, and she got transformation. That's
so
it.
Good.
Yeah.
So good. And that's one story of many, right? And so, but I think that really kind of showcased what the center does into perpetuity.
And why it's important for our whole community to care about. That girl could have held that secret in. She could have acted out in school. She could have began cutting or using to eliminate those trauma symptoms. Those are the things that kids learn as ways to cope. She could have done that path. She could have dropped out of school. She could have thought that her body was for being used. And she could have had an entirely different trajectory that could have cost our entire community. Because that girl that child who is hurt and no one intervenes, no one says you do not deserve this and I will do everything in my power to stop it. That child often ends up in the prison system with health outcomes that are expensive and unnecessary. That child ends up with psychological cost. And that child ends up in relationships that are not safe because their safety dial gets totally thrown off. So their community, in my mind, I'm like, this is the most moral time to respond. But frankly, if you're just a straight economics person, it's the most economically savvy time to respond. Like, let's do this now. Frankly, just like a broken arm, if you break your arm, get it fixed right now, or wait 5 years and have it be fixed, grow back together, but with disrepair, and then ultimately not be able to use it properly. Like, why? Let's fix it now and let's fix it right.
I love it. So we just had the breakfast. We have a breakfast fundraiser once a year, and there's Kevin McNeely was his name, right?
McNeil, yeah.
And McNeil. And I loved what he was talking about, the value of the seat, right, that you're in. And he was talking about people are paying $20,000 plus to go to the Super Bowl. But the
Which
reality
we're all sports people, so
yes,
a part of us gets that, you know?
I get it, but it really did make me think about how valuable that seat is, even at that breakfast in itself. So anybody who's listening to this, when I invite you to something and you say, no, I've got something better to do, I'm probably going to question your motives.
Right. But he said such a powerful line. He said, what you sit down for tells me what you'll stand up for. And that was so powerful.
It was so good.
And you do realize, like, I'm willing to sit down at this table and talk about our community being better. And so you can bet my pocketbook follows that. You can bet my heart follows that. You can bet I'll stand up for the things that the community needs to be better. And so I love that. I get to sit down with special people every day. So to me, one of the people always ask me, how do you stay in this business? And you see so many horrible things. We see horrible things. But it's because of how many people I see sit down at the table ready to seek solutions. I know that there's a lot of people who would stand up for our kids. It's remarkable. So I see a lot of bad in the world, but I see way more good.
Well, that breakfast made me really think about, and I think in the business world and leaders in the business world, it's very easy to get so busy that you don't realize how valuable those seats are of going to that breakfast, of of going to that gala, a lot of that stuff seems like a burden a lot of times, right? And I really think we need to stop and think about that, you know, and think about where we are choosing to sit down and the value of where we're choosing. And we might need to readjust that, recalibrate that a little bit. And I think, you know, for me, one of the most rewarding things has been being on the board. And I don't think I'm doing it that well, to be honest. Like, I'm trying to get better.
Look at us now, sharing the story. This is what a great board member does.
But you are an excellent, excellent board member. And that's where I wanted to connect with you when you were kind of leaving the board, because you had just been the chair. But just a lot of respect with the way that you handled yourself. And I know all the things behind the scenes. I don't even know what you did. But just in the board meetings in itself and the way that you guided those board meetings, I'd love for you just to kind of open mic, speak to the value of being on a board for an organization you believe in, and just kind of go from there.
I mean, I think it's an honor, to be honest with you. It's a joy for me, and that's what my prayer and hope is for every board member of the Advocacy Center, that you find the joy and the benefit of having a seat at the table, because every seat is important. We all, you know, that's what's amazing about most boards, and especially the Advocacy Center, is that your and I's path probably would have never crossed. I mean, we've lived in similar communities, but don't necessarily run in the same circles, go to different churches, our kids go to different schools. And so you have the opportunity to interact with people who have similar interests, have similar missions and values and passions for the community. So one, that's great, right? Like, I think we all in this business world, it's always a breath of fresh air when you get to sit shoulder to shoulder with someone who maybe sees the world a little similar to you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're all looking for that. You look for that in friendships and relationships. And so it's helpful when you can sit across the board table and be like, okay, we're all fighting for the same thing. We might have different political views. We may have different jobs, but at the same time, we're all fighting for the kids of this community. From a board member standpoint, I think it's huge just to be, you have to have obviously the right leadership in your organization. Not even from the board level, but who's running your organization. I'm a firm believer that there's different stages of boards in general, right? So there's inceptions of nonprofits, right? And so at an inception of a nonprofit, your board you're the hands and feet, right? You are the one going out fundraising. You're the one making hires. You're the one who's determining if we have 20 employees or 80 employees. Well, that's at the infancy of a nonprofit. Well, then the nonprofit grows. If it's healthy, right, it's going to grow into a sustaining, and it's healthy, and it's being able to run internally like a business. You know, that should be the goal of every board member, is that the organization that you're governing, because really that's the role of a board, is to govern. You're making risk decisions and policy decisions, and you have one employee typically, and that's the CEO. You know, that's our role as a board. Is Kristen's our only employee. We don't get to determine what happens with the other employees. She's accountable to us for the culture and the success of her employees and her staff. And so I just think that the board members, it's so vital not only just to listen at the board meetings, but hear. You know, those are two very different things. And when you can actually hear, you know, it would be different if 7 years ago we sat at the board table and just listened to Kristen be like, we have 80 people moving to this county a day. Like, what are we going to do? Well, I hear that information, great. Or I listen to that information. But if I don't hear that and actually be willing to do something with that information, if I'm not willing to sit and tell the story and invite police officers to the table, or invite people to, hey, let's support the Advocacy Center this month, or let's come with me to the gala, those types of things. It's inviting people to the table. It's part of a board's responsibility, but it's really listening to the organization, deciphering the data. You don't have to be a financial expert. That's always what makes me laugh with people. It's like, well, I don't know how to read balance sheets and income statements. I'm not qualified to serve on a board. I mean, I remember the first time with Kristen, she was like, I don't know, it's this, and this. And the board chair and I look at each other, because we're both financial people, and we're like, oh my gosh, I don't know that we're going to
I was like the one, the P and the L,
and
that
we're
one?
like, the profit and loss statement. Like, that's an important piece of
They were like,
the
never
puzzle.
snap when you say those
Don't
words.
ever snap again when you talk about financials. Those don't. But I say that to say you don't have to be the financial expert.
Yeah.
We have a finance committee. You need to have an idea, obviously, especially with a nonprofit, because you want to make sure. I always look at it and I always tell new board members, we are responsible to the community that is entrusting their dollars to us, right? Like, we want people to have a seat at the table and we want people to stand for our organization. And so we ask them to give. And so that means something, and that should mean something to every single one of us, that we're financially responsible with those gifts. We don't take that lightly. And so you do have to have a little bit of knowledge of that. But don't let that scare you.
There's somebody on our finance committee right now who is a marketing professional by trade.
Yeah.
And she got on that committee sort of like reluctantly, said, I don't know how to read this, but and now is her third year on it, loves it.
Yeah.
And she asked questions about HR. She asked questions about the heart of the money that we're doing. Mm-hmm. She asked questions about what do donors expect, because she isn't looking at the things that you might be looking at. Why is depreciation on here? She may not. I'm like, why is depreciation on there? I'll never understand. Yeah. But she's asking different questions that her heart, it ends up enriching the discussion on the finance committee. And so I do think you can learn a lot and maybe get out of your comfort zone on a board and be exposed to different parts of the business side that maybe you didn't have the natural professional strength in, but that you wanted to learn about.
I'm on the finance committee now, and we had a meeting yesterday, and one thing that kind of opened up my eyes a little bit, because we're kind of restructuring the projection, statement, and our, CFO kind of just made a mention like, we change this every year, so just let me know what y'all want. And I'm like, oh man, like I hate it that y'all have to do that, but you cater to the board very well. But at the same time, I kind of want to hear, and I'm not saying that there's anything out of bounds happening right now from what board members are asking for, but like, how is a board the best support for you in your role, but also accountability for your role too? So we kind of are support and accountability. But at the same time, I would imagine there's some times where you can get a board member that, just kind of wants to be heard, and it might create maybe more work that needs to be done and that kind of stuff. And so I'd love to hear from your perspective, like where you've seen really healthy boards, because I know for you, because you are very self-aware, you appreciate the value that a board brings even from an accountability standpoint. Like you appreciate that. Yeah. But kind of go ahead and tell me a little bit.
Well, first I would say Melanie has been one of the most influential teachers of the role of the board with me, and she had probably a clearer understanding of it. So I don't know if you want to talk some about, because I'm like, I learned everything from you.
Oh, God.
I learned a lot from you.
And I think, I don't know, I kind of giggled, and again, she and I are having a conversation with our eyes, because I wouldn't tell you it's all rainbows and butterflies and unicorns, right? We've had some board members who maybe get out of bounds, but I think that that's part of the board's role, right? Is that, one, you have to have enough of a trust and a relationship with your CEO or in charge of the organization that again, it kind of goes back, it weaves back into the victim services, right? It's like, if we're not as a board providing a safe place for Kristen to come to us and say, there's one within that's really causing strife, or that's crossed the line. There's a difference in asking questions and those types of things, but there's lines that we all have in the business community that you can't cross. And when and if those lines get crossed, how are we going to respond to that? And I think as a board member, that's huge. Yeah. And I think that that's where Kristen's probably love for our board has been, is because when lines have been crossed, because they have, I'm not going to tell you they haven't, we as a board were willing to step in. You don't make it public, you don't make it a front page news type of thing, but you handle situations as they should be handled and give your CEO the back to say, you're not going to do this on our watch. This is unacceptable.
Or you're getting our eye off the main thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's what can happen sometimes is people are wondering, they're wanting to make a place for themselves to the
They want to show people how much they know sometimes,
Yes,
like that can
yes.
happen.
And so then that can end up, oh wait, you're actually making me take my eye off the ball. And so then I can go and tell that. And we do everything in groups. So different committees are charged with looking at something together. So it's not a factions. It's like, hey, let me think through this. I have really high trust in these groups, but I think that has been a powerful thing of like, let's bring it before the group and let's get consensus on a path forward. And they have asked tough questions. They have wanted information. We have strategized together. We have figured out, were there times we needed to tap the brakes or draw the line? All those things are done in a group setting. And so that feels like good governance. It's done with transparency. And then we have consensus on the plan and we go forward with it. And that's cool. That's cool board work. They're not running the company, and that's where Melanie has been an eager champion of the role of governance. She is clear on. Sometimes I'll say like, "What do you think I should do, this or this?" And she's like, "I want to be here to help you think through it. But at the end of the day, that's a you decision." And so you've been clear on that when maybe I'm a people pleaser part of me or a new professional. I want y'all to make this decision for me. And she's like, I'll have your back. I'm helping you line it up, but I'm not telling you the answer. I don't have the answer. She doesn't know my day-to-day. And so that has been enormously powerful for me to see. And then over time, she has told people, you don't get to ask that question. That's her thing. If you can hold her accountable.
My favorite statement is it governance or is it operations? If it's operations, it's not our job.
Yeah.
She doesn't have any patience for it.
I mean, I don't, because it's not, if you're on a healthy board, again, and I mean, we're talking in the context of the Advocacy Center of North Texas and that board, and so we know the organization is in a healthy place. And so our role needs to be for governance, risk, those types of things.
Yeah.
If it's operational, again, we have one employee and it's Kristen. And so that's the big thing. And so it's this hard balance as a board, back to your question, it's kind of this hard balance as a board member. It's like, I want to serve, I want to help, I want to do whatever you want me to do.
Put me in, coach.
But I'm not part of I'm not part of the operations of the organization. And that's the balance that you have to have as a board member. And so most board members have other jobs, right? Like most people today don't just volunteer on board. Some people do, but you and I both have full-time jobs and careers that are demanding. And so this is a get to, right? We get to volunteer here. We get to be a part of this, get to have a seat at this table. And so what do we want to give to that? But at the same time, you want to be the hands and feet, but you've got to let the operations be the operations. And I'm just a firm believer in that, because boards roll, right? In my mind, healthy boards, there's consistent movement of that. And if you and I are running the organization and we roll off as a board, how does that help the organization? It doesn't. You've got to let the organization grow, and there is accountability of, I push her all the time of, okay, well, who's your next? She talks about, somebody came and tapped her on the shoulder and said, I think you'd be great at fundraising. So our role as board members is to tap her on the shoulder and say, who are you tapping on the shoulder?
Yeah.
We're not supposed to tap them on the shoulder, but we're supposed to ask her those questions.
Yeah. And I think I'm sensitive to making sure, the amount of work that goes into preparing for these board meetings. Do you guys feel like you're serving the board, or do you feel like you're serving the organization in the amount of work that you're doing to prepare for these board meetings, right? And so I think it should be you're serving the organization, but can you give me kind of like a lens into, just the amount of work that goes into preparing for a monthly board meeting, right? And I feel like it's probably significant.
It is significant. But if the question is this serving the agency? And I look at that breakfast, and there's 100% board participation on the financial end. Every one of those tables is filled with a board member who has brought other people to the table. Then I'm like, getting your buy-in the month before, worth it.
Yeah.
It was worth it because you do believe in it. You did show up for us. Every single person on that board showed up for us. It was extraordinary. And so there's tremendous power in that. And I can say to the audience, you're sitting with a board member who brought you today who thinks that you have the same values that they do and that you will care about kids the way they have cared. And I'm literally raising the next generation of people who are investing in this agency because of the board. So yeah, the month before we put, crossed our T's and dotted our I's and got all the, I try to be strategic about what I bring to the board. Can this be an emotional connect? Is this filling your, or am I alerting you to some of the business concerns? Am I giving you a space to show up with your talent? This isn't a place for me just to tell you, hey, I'm talented, I hope that you like me. I probably did that more at the beginning, but now I know I want my time to be used wisely when I'm in rooms, so can I deploy you? Then that's important to me. Can I make you feel connected to this? The board is the inner circle of getting to see this work. It's pretty hidden in a community outside of the board. And so I know a piece of my job is to let you in so that you have a heart for it and that you understand any stereotypes people might have about victims probably aren't based on reality. Whether you think it happens only in some kind of other neighborhood to some kind of other kind of family that isn't as dialed in as me, those are false fences that you put up and say it won't happen to me. And so if I can let you in and let you see the enormous sense of this happening out of the blue to a family who thought that everything was on one path and now they have a totally different path, then you'll have empathy for that person, and you'll have a commitment to that response. And so I want to do some stuff on the board to get you engaged in that. So I think that's the power of a community board. You aren't you're not making money off of this. You're not a shareholder in that way, but you are ensuring that it happens. And so I need to make sure that you feel like it should happen. It should be something we fight for.
It's our opportunity as board members to kind of hear an in-depth story, And I mean, Kristen does a really good job of making sure she's conscientious of time. And, as far as that, everybody's time is valuable. And so how much information can we get in a shorter period, a reasonable amount of time? And so you have the financial aspect. But really, as a board member, it's your opportunity, again, to have a seat at the table and be like, I get behind the scenes view of this organization. It gets her opportunity to get more buy-in. You've been on the board a handful of years, and it takes time on boards just to get your feet under you, right? It's just, okay, I get this piece and this piece. And so it's really her and her team's opportunity to get to tell the story pieces at a time to at the end of your 6-year term, hopefully you walk away feeling like, okay, I have a really good understanding of who we serve, how we serve, the impact we make, the trajectory of this organization. Those are the things that is her goal for you as a board member 6 years down the road.
There was this interesting TED Talk a while back. Dan Pallotta spoke about the way we think about charity is dead wrong is the name of the TED Talk, and it's really powerful. But in it, he talks about the lack of funding for infrastructure. And so one of the things that I think board members can do is, I only want to raise money to serve direct clients. Well, at the end of the day, though, I need a database, and I need marketing, and I need financial services. And when I got there, I was, what's that one? The P and the L? So I knew I was gonna have to have a CFO, but that was a massive investment for our organization. We hadn't had a financial person that was a separate role, that wasn't a board member coming in and doing some bookkeeping. Like, okay, we are gonna have to invest in this. So, and I didn't have the skills to read a P&L, and I didn't have the skills to interview a CFO, but I had a fantastic resource at my disposal. So she sat in those interviews with me. We just rolled out a new statewide database, and it has been a very painful process. I'll bring that to the board. These are some things that are outside of my training, but that you all might have a lot of understanding about, or access to resources, or a way of supporting the agency, so that I can walk in with a certain skill level. You need me to have a skill level. I think it's a huge victory for the agency that I have a skill level in victim services. I know programs, I know how to create change.
Huge
I think
value,
that's of value. But I know I also have needed a construction hat on. I've needed a financial hat, I've needed a facilities hat, I've needed HR. And so I can't be all that. That's okay. I have the imposter syndrome. I worry about it all the time. What if they find out I don't have all that? And then I tell myself, wait a second, I have that. Let me reach out to this community. And if you know enough about the work, then when I come to you with the problem, hey, and this is a problem that happened a few years ago, our payroll wasn't going to make, there was a glitch in the system, and they were going to have to wire every single person payroll end of year. I'm like, that can't be done, right? I call Melanie. She's in a financial institution. Can this be done? She's like, absolutely, that can be done. I'm like, they're telling me it can't be done. She's like, I actually know how it can be done. We'll set up the spreadsheet this way and it can be done this way. And she knew the answer. She didn't just like fight for it. She knew the answer. And I reached out to the person who had the answer. And we were able to fight for our staff to get paid at the end of the year before a long holiday weekend when somebody else was saying, that's going to be a lot of work. And by the way, we're wrapping, no wrap up. She's like, nope, they don't get to wrap up.
Yeah.
And it was,
I did it, knocked on their door.
And they said, well, she's going to have to sign 75 wires. She's like, that's fine. Tell me what time. Boy, did she stand up for our team.
I love it.
But it was that knowledge. So I think when CEO who can get in the place of confidence of saying, I don't have this skill set, but I wonder if one of y'all does. I've got a problem. Here's what it is. That's enormously powerful for a board. And you don't know when I'm going to tap that, what the need is going to be. But I'm running a business too, so I'm going to have the things that all businesses have. I bet I'm going to use your talent at some point.
But that's our role as a board member, right? Is to be able to create an environment of trust that she feels like I can call you on a holiday weekend and be like, hey, I need help.
Yeah.
But then also know what your skill set is. So if you just come to a board meeting and you just sit there and you don't ever engage or ever interact or ever bring anything to the table, then that's not fulfilling for you and it's not fulfilling for the agency. And so that's just what I would say as well as a board member is come giving of your gifts and talents, right? Yeah. It's not just financial. It's not a financial obligation.
Be ready to not be comfortable, to do things that you're not comfortable with. I mean, I love it. I love it. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe a lot. And I wouldn't say I'm digressing because I think this is an important thing to talk about too. I think from everybody that's listening to this, it's no surprise that y'all are two very excellent women. And I can only assume that has been an interesting story in itself of getting to the level that you have been as a female in this crazy business world, right? And so I would kind of love to just kind of start that discussion a little bit. And this will probably kind of lead us into maybe the end of our discussion. First, I guess with you, Melanie, would love to just kind of hear, I don't even know how to plant this question other than just kind of speak to the journey that you've had, maybe uniquely in a sense of, being a female and whether there's been blessings, challenges, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Sure. And I think I'll go back to kind of where we started is as a young girl that I saw my mom work in a financial institution and I saw my dad working in an accounting firm. Obviously, my mom and I's relationship is very, very close. And so she was the one that I would call every day when I got home from school, all of those things. And I remember watching her as a kid and seeing that she kind of was just at this like mid-level management. And every time a management opportunity would come up, they would ask her and she would share that with us at the dinner table. And her answer was always no. And as a little girl, I remember sitting at a kitchen table not any bigger than this being like, why? Like, why would you not want to be in charge? Why would you? Just never could wrap my brain around it. And so I would tell you that God absolutely put that seed in me from a little girl of that I knew that God had leadership roles for me. And what that looked like, I obviously had no idea, but I just remember so specifically never understanding why she wouldn't take that opportunity. And it just wasn't her calling. It wasn't what she wanted, and she had different paths that she wanted for her life. And now, 43 years old, I can understand that. But at 10, I was like, that's crazy, Mom. Like, why would you not? So I would tell you that's where it started, honestly, is that I just knew that. And I was very involved in sports. And I would tell you that sports was a trajectory for me to feel have confidence and leadership and learn those.
What sports did you play?
I ran track.
Okay.
So I was a runner. And so I went to a big school, and so we only got to do one sport. I always wanted to be a cheerleader or always wanted to play volleyball. In the school that I went to, you really got to do one sport, and that was about it because it was just such a big school. And so ran track a little bit in college. And so anyhow, I would tell you athletics for me was that trajectory of getting there. And then my leadership, I would tell you, is I've had a lot of people, like Kristen said, tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, why don't you try this? But what I would tell you and tell your listeners is your response is key. If I would have said no to any of those opportunities, I don't know where my path would have taken me.
It probably would have immediately put you in a box, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. But it was like, okay, I want you to be in charge of this. Well, I mean, I can tell you a real life story. So I had my first child. He was 8.5 weeks early. He was in the NICU for weeks. I had just come home with him and less than 5 pounds still, and come back to work a couple weeks later, and my boss says, I want you to be in charge of accounting. I'm a brand new mom. My husband's a coach, which if your audience knows, coaches are gone all the time. I mean, so I'm pretty much a single mom, brand new baby. Everything on paper, I should have said no, right? But I didn't. I said, absolutely, without even, thinking it through, without even talking to my husband, like, absolutely. And so, and that's what I tell.
But you're kind of seeing goals kind of flash in your eyes.
Absolutely. You can see, like, I can put my fingerprints on this. And, today I have the opportunity to teach a leadership class. We have a leadership group that we have applicants from our company, and we take 10 to 12 people or employees every year, and we sit around a table once a month and we read books and we talk about culture and we go in depth about the different parts of our organization. But it's at those opportunities that I get to then communicate, this was my experience and this is how I can encourage you the same. If you have those goals, and what I've learned in my 23 years in leadership and growing is that that's not for everybody. I have a lot of employees that are just like my mom, who want to go to work and come home and not maybe take some stuff home with them. And you need those employees. Yes. As leaders, it's our job to recognize I need those employees. Not everybody can be in charge. Not everybody can be a decision maker. And again, as a young professional, that was hard for me. I'm like, why do these people not want more? I felt like I was back to 10 years old sitting at the kitchen table with my mom. Like, why would you not want more? But as you mature and grow, you realize that not everybody wants a seat at the table, and that's okay. You need those people. But if you're gonna have a seat at the table, you have to take it seriously. And so that's what I would tell you is kind of how I got there from the family side and mom side of it. I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you it's not challenging. There's many times that you miss a field trip or you don't get to volunteer for the putting the party together kind of thing.
And that's an expectation that moms have that dads don't.
Absolutely, and it really is. It really, and that's my husband. My husband's always been like, who cares? And I'm like, well, I care. I don't, I would be honest with you and just tell you that, there's definitely some, not guilt, but heaviness of like, I have a senior. My oldest is a senior. And I look back and think, well, did I miss too much? Are there things that I missed? Are there opportunities? But at the end of the day, Matt, I look at my kids and my kids know that their mom works hard and that their mom gives back to their community and that their mom loves them and is present as best as she can be when she's home and even when she's not. I get texts from my kid. Now I can get texts from my kids and they'll ask me questions and they know, I'm gonna respond as quickly as I can. Or my kids know if they call me twice, I'm going to walk out of whatever meeting I'm in, that they become the priority. And so, it's as a woman and as a mom, you really do try to still wear both hats of how do I be there for my kids but at the same time be there for my organization. And you have to have great organizations like DATCU or Locked-In or the Advocacy Center that allow you that. And I recognize that as a woman and speaking to women, not all organizations offer that flexibility that my boss knows. If I walk out of a meeting to take a phone call, it's important. I'm not just being rude. Or my staff knows that, And so working for an organization that provides that growth when you are trying to wear multiple hats as a mom is huge.
Yeah. I also think one of the things I have found was important was, I'll say this funny, but I self-promote with my kids, and I don't really mean that, but I'm not walking into every day apologizing for what I missed.
Yeah.
I'm sitting at the dinner table telling them about what was great about my day, what was hard about my day, what I think I succeeded at, what I think I failed at. They're walking with those same things. So it becomes a very equal place for us to come together and share about the rest of our lives. For me, that's an outgrowth of working in domestic violence where one person had no power in the family and did not have an identity. That's what happens over time when you were victimized in your home. You lose your identity. And so for me, I always felt like it was the dynamic of a healthy home meant I have an identity and you have an identity. And there's a place for all of us to bring all of our hopes, dreams, failures, successes. Oh, this I hate at work, this I love at work, this person totally had my back today, this person didn't. Same things my first grader was telling me, same thing as my high school senior is telling me. And so she walks in thinking her day is important and mine is too. And I'm not apologizing for everything I couldn't make happen. That's just not realistic. She doesn't have to apologize for everything she couldn't make happen in the day. We're prioritizing what we think is coming at us, and you get better at prioritizing it. We're in positions where we have a couple of things. I think at the beginning of your career, you aren't probably in a position to be able to set your priorities. Other people are setting them for you. That is a harder stage. So it's nice when you advance along your career and you can have a team around you. But I will tell you that those early decision making and early setting of priorities actually probably made me a better leader, because I'm good at saying, here's two competing things that are really cool, I choose this one, and here's why. It fits with our values, it fits with where we are. I think we can be successful at this, I think it's a stretch. Whatever it is, I actually have a rubric for how I decide between really interesting things. I've been deciding between interesting things for the last 20 years of being a mom and an executive.
Yeah.
So I'm actually developing the skill along the way. I also don't think it's just on me. I have a team, and over time, I am better and better at delegating, at communicating what's going to be needed, at giving the vision, and then letting go. And that is also a skill that you need when you're running a company and running a family. I cannot do all this. Babe, you're going to be in charge of this. This is your skill set. Babe, you've got this on your own. You can do it without me here. We're going to be fine. I can't wait to hear how it was. Let's team up or, kind of debrief afterwards. That's the exact skill that I have in my company.
Yeah.
It's not all on me, and my family doesn't run with it all being on me either.
Yeah.
And what a testament you are to your girls by doing that, right?
Right?
Like that's what I always think about too, is like my husband and I are teaching our kids that you can be individually successful and successful at home. Like
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
you don't have to make a choice. And that's growing that next generation.
Yeah. This is a funny story about Mother's Day, 4-year-old class, my oldest daughter. This is the self-promoter in me. That was a stage where a lot of stay-at-home moms were there. And so the teacher asked all the kids in a funny little Mother's Day card, what does your mom do while you're gone? She goes to Target, she takes a nap, she plays tennis, and my daughter wrote, she changes lives. So that's the self-promotion that I engage in. Like, well, I've got a busy day today, I'm changing lives. And so, that didn't require an apology to go with it. So
Communication is key.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also valuable. Like my wife stays at home, and she's unbelievable, right? And her value is obviously in the fact that our kids are very nurtured, they're very cared for, but also I am, right? I'm able to do maybe a little bit more than the average guy can in my role because I've got such a great support at home too. So it's all so valuable, right? But from what I'm hearing from you guys is that your journey coming up didn't have as much necessarily gender barriers as it was drive barriers. I mean, you two are driven, right? And is that a fair assessment a little bit?
Yeah, and I think it's definitely drive, and I think it's confidence in your own skin, because I mean, there's many times, Matt, that I was and am the only woman at the table.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's a real thing. But if I've never let that be a hindrance in having a voice. And so that's what I would tell you. It's the drive and the confidence.
Yes,
is
100%,
that's the reality of the world that we live in and the businesses that we run in. And but at the same time, it's how do you respond to that? Just like how do you respond when someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, I think you'd be really good at this. It's how are you going to have a seat at the table? What are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
I bet you've had people that you said, I want to be like that person. I saw somebody when I was a young professional before I had babies, and I was working on my PhD in social work, and I was asking my professor, so what do you do with this? And he's like, well, you can work here. And he had this like brown, musty office with books and papers everywhere. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound that great. So I'm like, what do I do with this? And so I go to this volunteer organization I was a part of, a service organization, and I hear this woman speak, and she's running a nonprofit agency, and she's lighting the room on fire with energy around stepping up to the plate as a community member and being a part of recognizing that this type of victimization happens in your community. And I was like, I want to work for her. And so I signed up for the volunteer activity at her office, and I got to meet her, and I'm like, I want to be you. I want to run an agency just like this. Like I was searching. I told everyone I was having a quarter life crisis, and which you can picture me walking around.
I can totally.
I'm quarter life crisising, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And then I see somebody, and I want to be that. And then I worked to learn the parts of the business that would allow me to be able to do that. Yeah. So the drive came from a vision that somebody else painted for me. We're lucky that we got to see more women in the workplace. I hope that I get to be somebody that people might want to aspire to be one day. And I hope that that person also gave me the job, made it fun for me, and tapped me on the shoulder and told me I had different skills. And so I hope I can be those things.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, Camp Locked In kind of shows that for us at Locked In, but I do know the other day I was in the car and I was having to be on a conference call in the car, and my daughter was in the car with me, and I had to get off. When I got off the call, I was like, I promise I love my job so much. It's really fun. She's like, sounds really fun, like the conference call. But
so she loves her friends, but sometimes she's crying and stressed about her friends. So actually I think that it shows, hey, you and I are a lot alike. We're navigating worlds where I love people and this is hard. And that is exactly what they're experiencing. I think that probably meant a lot to your daughter to see, hey, my dad has tough days too, and he fights for it, and he has to sit down and hold his tongue, or he has to say assertively what he thinks, and then he has to back off. Like whatever she saw in that moment, I bet she ended up using in a relationship she had that was on a smaller level, perhaps, but a really important one to her.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I love it. Well, our time is up. Okay. I feel like we could talk forever, but I know you've got an important thing that you've got to get to. So
trying to raise more money.
I know. But thank y'all so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, this is so fun, and who knows, we might do it again. But for right now, I just want to welcome y'all to the Excellence Culture, and thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
Yeah.